Pues muy buenas tardes a todos por acompañarnos en este webinar.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us in this webinar organized by Renew Europe on the 25-year anniversary of the Barcelona Process. First of all, I would like to thank especially our three guests for having found the time to take part in this discussion. They have a very hectic agenda. And I would also like to thank my dear colleague, Nathalie Lozon. She is an expert in Euromed relations in her own right. Thank you for presenting this webinar with me. It's a pleasure doing this together with these very important guests. This is a panel, this is an event which is very important because we do not only celebrate the 25 years, but it takes place in a very timely moment. It is the 25th anniversary of the institutionalization of the Euromed relation, as well as 10 years have passed since the beginning of the Arab revolutions. And despite all that, the region is still facing the same challenges that was facing 10 or 25 years ago. But we have new challenges as well, such as, for example, a more intense geopolitical competition, the risks and opportunities of this digitalization, and a terrible impact that the COVID-19 pandemic is having on both shores of the Mediterranean. That's why it is important that we take time to reflect on the last decades of Euromed relations, both what has worked well, and we need to think of that, that has not worked very well, to improve that. But the most important thing is thinking of the future and reflecting on how we can turn these challenges in opportunities. We need to think of new ways of strengthening our cooperation in order to address common challenges and generate a shared prosperity for all shores of this common house, which is our dear Mediterranean. And I live in the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean. So in order to understand the complex and diverse nature of the geography, politics, society, or the Mediterranean economy, we need to analyze that from an equally diverse approach. And that's why we put together a panel of speakers which is as diverse as possible, with voices from the academic world, from civil society, from institutions, but also from both shores of the Mediterranean. And that's what we want to manifest today. And I would also like to make a very curious comment. All of our speakers today, including my colleague and co-host and well-friend Nathalie, they are gentlemen or women from the Legion of Honor. So I'm the only panel member who haven't received that distinction. And I would like to take the opportunity to say that maybe you can make it happen in the future. But I wanted to say it, and I want to show the great level of speakers that we have today in our panel. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our three guests. I will start with the first speaker, Mr. Álvaro de Vasconcelos. Álvaro de Vasconcelos, he is from Portugal, and he has an outstanding curriculum. He is the founder of Euromesco, the largest network of Mediterranean think tanks. He is the former director of the Institute of the Security Studies, and he is a regular columnist of international press, author and co-editor of numerous publications, very relevant ones and very important ones. And there are few academics that understand the European foreign politics and Euromed relations as he does. So, dear Alvaro, thank you for being here with us today, and I look forward to your contributions to this panel. Muito obrigado. Secondly, and our second guest today is Mrs. Delphine Bourrion, that up until last August, she was represented France before the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. And I would like to especially thank Mrs. Bourrion for being part of this panel, because Mr. Fatala Siyomasi was indisposed and couldn't be here with us today. This happened a few hours ago, so we sent him our greetings so that he can get well very soon. And we know that it is not related to COVID. So that's important to highlight. Between 2013 and 2017, Mrs. Porion was the Deputy Secretary General of the Social and Civil Affairs of the Mediterranean Union. So she knows firsthand about Euro-Med relations, and it will be very interesting to have her today in our discussion. Thank you once again for being with us today. Merci beaucoup. And finally, our third speaker today will be Mrs. Basma Kotmani from Syria. Same as Mr. Vasconcelos, she is a well-known academic and co-founder of the Arab Reform Initiative, a network of independent research institutions that work to promote democracy in the Arab world. Mrs. Kotmani is also the former spokesperson of the Syrian opposition, so she can provide a very important vision of the democratization process in the region, the obstacles that we are facing, as well as the role played by the European Union within this context. So, Mrs. Kotmani, thank you very much and welcome. Thank you for being here today. Shukran. Finally, and before we give the floor to Natalie, our guest, I would like to remind you, for all of you that are present here today, through the streaming, we have a program, and it is the following. Our speakers will have 10 minutes to introduce themselves and the vision on the Euro-Med relations. Following, we will open a 40-minute discussion that will be moderated by me and by Natalie. And those that are following us, if you have any questions or comments, we will kindly request that you write them in the chat box. And if we have time, we will respond as many as possible. And once we finalize this 40-minute debate, we will close the event, sharing the most important conclusions. So having said these comments and the introduction, I will now give the floor to my dear friend and colleague, Natalie. Thank you very much. Natalie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jose Ramon. It's a pleasure for me to co-organize with you today's webinar in this day of 25 years of the Barcelona process, an anniversary which is rather discreetly organized. Of course, with the COVID-19 situation, it's more difficult to celebrate such anniversaries. However, such discussion is a pity, and this is why we have such a webinar today to put focus on the Euro-Mediterranean partnership, to highlight its successes, because there were successes, but also on the challenges it faces. Among the successes, we will never talk enough about what is being done in terms of the protection of the environment, in terms of infrastructure projects, connectivity, mobility, in terms of exchanges, cultural and university exchanges, but also civil society dialogue around the Mediterranean. The Union of the Mediterranean is an active forum, and other formats also exist. For example, the 5+5 in the Western Mediterranean region. We know it is very useful, in most cases on very sensitive topics. But let's be realistic. The Euro-Mediterranean partnership is also faced with great difficulties, notably on a political point of view. It's been a long time that the Israel-Palestine conflict has been a major challenge, and many tensions in the Maghreb between Algeria and Morocco make cooperation more difficult at the scale of Northern Africa. And then, of course, the Libyan conflict, the tragedy in Syria continue not very far from the EU, from Europe, and we cannot manage to have enough influence for a peaceful resolution. Too many countries in Europe still see the Mediterranean as a secondary security issue, while the behavior of Turkey faced with Greece in Syria, in Lebanon and other countries should raise more the alarm. And at the same time that Russia has a massive intervention in Syria and is present in the Mediterranean. There is also the migration issue, which is in everybody's mind. The issue of human rights is less in focus, but both are closely connected. And it is in this context that it's my pleasure to have such prestigious speakers today, and I thank them wholeheartedly for being here today and for their availability. I will now, without further delay, give them the floor to hear them out on the present, the past and the future of the Euro-Mediterranean partnership, and we will start with Álvaro de Vasconcelos. Thank you very much indeed.
Good afternoon. Great pleasure to be here in this debate. Of course, a very important question for all of us, in particular for Europe or for the North African people. And I would like to start by looking at the Barcelona 25 years ago. What was happening? Why we had this Barcelona summit, this Barcelona conference, and a very promising process. We must remember that we're in the 90s. The 90s were the years of all hopes, of a wave of democracy in Europe. And of course, at that time, democracy was not yet the rule in the Southern Mediterranean countries, that it is not today. The Southern Mediterranean countries were facing hard social problems and lack of democracy and very authoritarian regimes. But even so, it was possible for the European Union, for the Europeans, with their southern partners, to agree on a project where democracy was at the heart of the process. If you go to the Barcelona Declaration, and we should read again the Barcelona Declaration, we forgot it very quickly, what we wrote there, unfortunately. It is said in the Barcelona Declaration that there is a common commitment of the all partners to develop the rule of law and democracy in their political systems. So the objective was clear, a democratic process. And how was this democratic process being put forward? What was being put forward through economic integration, through the European model, in fact. This common belief that we have, that with economic development would come a stronger middle class, a stronger middle class, a greater demand for democracy. This is not sure that this is the case. I'm not convinced, but there was another very important dimension of the Barcelona process was the role given to civil society. From the beginning, even in countries that were quite authoritarian, civil society started playing a very important role in the process. I was involved in the time under the Euromesc network in a number of initiatives of civil society, north and south of the Mediterranean. And I could see how the European Commission in particular was supporting these civil society networks and civil society activities in all domains, from human rights to women's rights to social justice. In 2005, we had again, as you remember, a summit in Barcelona. And in that summit in Barcelona, at the Euromesc network, we were asked by the ministers of the Barcelona process to produce a report. And we produced a report that was called Barcelona Plus. So we were asking for going forward with the Barcelona process, a step forward, Barcelona Plus, towards a Euro-Mediterranean community of democratic states. We are saying the end goal of this process should be a Euro-Mediterranean community of democratic states. Of course, a lot of things happened since then. First of all, the Barcelona process, guided by the European Commission, where the European Commission had a central role, was weakened by the Union for the Mediterranean. that became a more intergovernmental process, less linked to the communitarian approach with benchmark and conditionality as it was until 2008. And after we had the democratic revolutions of 2011 and the great hope that finally the idea of a community of democratic states will be possible. Unfortunately, since then, the situation changed dramatically. But I think we should have in mind, and this is important for our policy, that the situation is quite different in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Western Mediterranean. In the Eastern Mediterranean, and I'm speaking of a large Eastern Mediterranean that goes until the border between Libya and Tunisia, that I really feel it's our border. Today is the border between Libya and Tunisia. On the Eastern Mediterranean, we have war and dictatorships and very strong nationalist trends, like what's happening in Turkey. In the Western Mediterranean, we have Tunisia under the process of consolidating democracy. And we should not deny it or forget it in our policies. Tunisia is a success story of all our process of cooperation and is in a process of consolidating democracy. Very difficult, of course, with a lot of problems that we can speak about, but it's a process of consolidated democracy. And Algeria and Morocco are more liberal regimes than those of most of the states of the Eastern Mediterranean. There is more freedom of press, political pluralism, of course, under authoritarian regimes, but we could call even if it's a paradox, authoritarian liberal regimes, what could seem like a paradox, but makes a quite different situation in the Western Mediterranean from the Eastern Mediterranean. What could we do now? And let me just state 3 or 4 ideas for the future. The first idea is that we should reaffirm, we the Europeans, that our end goal in our relations with the Mediterranean states of the South is to build a Euro-Mediterranean community of democratic states. It looks like an utopia. It is an utopia, but it's an utopia in the sense that Paul Ricoeur used the word utopia, a realistic utopia, you know, an horizon where we want to go. And that's our goal. Of course, a very difficult goal, and it will take years and years, a lot of patience, a lot of time. The second aspect that is central, I think, is to go back to this idea of empowering the civil society, considering that the civil society in the South are our best allies, in particular those sectors of civil society that are developing a democratic culture in their activities, a democratic culture in their associations. I remember during the Portuguese dictatorship, and certainly was also the case during the Spanish dictatorship, it was on the civil society organizations, on the associations, that a democratic culture was being developed. And I think it's important to have that in mind. For the Europeans, I think it's very important to understand the diversity of the civil society in the South. We tend to speak with those that look like us. We have a lot of difficulty with what I have called in the book that I have published, the unfamiliar voices. Those that we are not used to understand. And this, of course, I'm speaking of those who have a political Islamic inspiration. And we tend to see them through the same eyes, you know, if they're without differentiation. I think 3 key priorities in our relations with the countries of the South, in what concerns this very important question of political Islam, is to differentiate, first priority, second, to differentiate, third, to differentiate. And this calls for an intellectual effort of our part. And if we look, for instance, to Tunisia, we see how important role Ennahda, the political Islam party, has played in the transition in Tunisia. If we had considered Ennahda as an enemy, Tunisia will not be in a process of democratic consolidation. And we know that in Morocco, the PJD plays a positive role in the political system in Morocco, and is a partner even of the regime. For that, the Europeans need to apply what the President of the Commission going to Cairo in 2011 has declared. And I'm going to read because I think it's quite important. This was Durão Barroso, the President of the Commission, that went to Cairo in 2011, and he declared, in the past, too many have traded democracy for stability. I repeat, in the past, too many have traded democracy for stability. But recent events have only proved that lasting stability can only be achieved through democratic governance and accountability. Are we not now again back trading stability for democracy? Are we, the Europeans, being really able to put in the agenda human rights as you used to put in the first decade of the Barcelona process, or in the first decades of the Barcelona process? And now we are in a very, I would say, particular situation. We have a new American administration, the Biden-Harris administration. And they have declared, in particular in the case of Egypt, that Sisi is not anymore their favorite dictator, as Trump used to say, no? Trump used to call Sisi its favorite dictator. So if the Americans are going to change their policy, as I'm convinced, in relation to Egypt, being a stronger support of the Egyptian civil society, and to support Egyptian civil society means to support human rights in Egypt. If the Americans are going to be critical of the policy and demand the liberation of political prisoners in a country with 60,000 political prisoners, if this is going to be the American policy, it will be very strange that we, the Europeans, will be perceived as a supporter of the authoritarian regimes. And we will lose our fundamental power. And what is our fundamental power? The power of our values, the power of the attraction of the European Union, what we have called in the past, and we should call even today, the soft power of the European Union. This power of attraction. The European Union as a project that people in the South believe that is a project for development, for human rights, and for democracy. We cannot say, okay, we are for democracy and human rights in Central Europe. We don't like illiberal regimes in Central Europe, but we love authoritarian regimes in the South. I asked a number of colleagues who wrote to me this report in 2005, how they perceive the future today, many years after. And most of them, they said, times are too good for dictators. So our ideas of a common democracy, a shared project of democracy, are today not in the agenda. I'm not convinced. I think it's going to be in the agenda. With change in America, with a stronger demand in the South, and let me give you just 2 examples of that. There was a public opinion poll made very recently, and on that public opinion poll in all Arab world, 74% of the people that answered to they declare that democracy was the best system for their government, for their country, 74%. And 580% declare that the Arab democratic wave, or the Arab Spring as it is called, of 2011, was a very positive event. And only 28% had a negative view of the Arab revolutions. And we have seen the last years with the Iraq movement, in particular in Algeria, but also in the East, this demand for more democracy. So we Europeans have, the challenge to think how we are going to compatibilize the need for multilateral and bilateral relations with authoritarian leaders, and at the same time to be very clear in our demand and our support for democracy and human rights. Let me conclude with the last idea, that is, I have mentioned that I think the East and the West Mediterranean are quite different, in a quite different situation. So I think that the idea of variable geometry, should be at the heart of our policy. And of course, our main and first priority should be to support Tunisia and the consolidation of democracy in Tunisia. That means to support the Tunisian government to face these enormous social problems that they have. You know, we need to support employment, youth employment, more jobs, not more competition, not more high-tech companies only that are very competitive internationally. We need also to be much more generous on the agricultural domain, even if this is a problem for our it seems a problem for our common agriculture policy. And finally, this policy towards Tunisia could be extended to Algeria and Morocco. I'm not going too far today, but I'm thinking about it. If we should not develop a kind of European Maghreb new project, or based in the old project, to give to the European Union Maghreb relations a greater priority, and make it clear, hoping that cooperation in the Maghreb and inter-Maghrebian cooperation will make of Maghreb a partner. We know the Union for the Maghreb is a coquille vide, to use a French expression, but it still exists. So there is somewhere this demand for Maghreb Union is there. We should favor it, and this should be clear one of our priorities in building this Euro-Mediterranean community of democratic states. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais maintenant passer
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Delphine Borion. She has seen on the ground what was happening as a Deputy Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. Thank you, Delphine, for being here with us today. You have the floor. Thank you very much for inviting me, Nathalie and Mr. Bausa. It is a sheer pleasure for me to be here with you today to talk about a key topic, which is the relationship of Europe with southern countries. We have this Euro-Mediterranean dialogue that we are celebrating today with the 25th anniversary of the process of Barcelona. And today is an opportunity to talk about those issues. As you said, I am replacing my colleague, Mr. Sijin Massi, so maybe I don't have such a broad experience, but at least I've been working for the Union for the Mediterranean. As it was said, the process of Barcelona that was created 25 years ago was created because we wanted a shared space of prosperity. The need of such a debate was obvious. We needed such a dialogue. Our populations are close. We have common economic challenges, common security challenges, and common problems that can only be solved through regional solutions. The process of Barcelona brought a lot. and allowed us to tackle different topics, political, economic, cultural topics, including the human rights, as Mr. Vasconcelos said. What we tend to forget is that the process of Barcelona was the EU going towards the south. So it was a one-way policy in a way, whereas the Union for the Mediterranean, as created in 2008, had the idea to put all the countries around the table as equal partners. All countries had the same power, with one voice and one vote for each country. The goal was to develop common decisions, and it was very important to work together as equal partners for the Union for the Mediterranean. The goal, obviously, was regional cooperation, focusing on key common topics that countries from the Mediterranean had in common. The methodology that was defined and formalized in the roadmap that was adopted in 2017 was based on three principles: policies, partnerships, and projects. So 3 Ps. Policies first. Why? Well, because nothing is possible without the states. We need states to commit, politically speaking, if we want things to change. This is why we've developed guides on transport, energy, blue economy, the digital area, and gender equality as well. We've been working on industrial development, women empowerment, and so on. We also had several meetings with the ministers of foreign affairs. Then, after policies, partnerships. The Union for the Mediterranean is a platform for a dialogue. And this is done in partnership with the whole Mediterranean galaxy, if I may say, because there are many other actors, such as civil society, parliaments. So we have the Union of Members of Parliaments of the Mediterranean area. We have regional and local authorities that are represented, the private sector as well. All those stakeholders must work together. It is absolutely key to have those different viewpoints. And the Union for the Mediterranean is a proper platform to tackle key common topics. This allows the different stakeholders to work together, exchange, and develop common projects. And then the third pillar of the EU FM is the concrete projects on which it has been working. The UFM is here to facilitate and give more visibility to different projects. Around 50 projects have been labeled by the UFM, such as youth employment, women empowerment, gender equality, women employment. We had different projects such as young female entrepreneurs. So we had many projects that can give to the youth and to women the capacity to be a driver of change in the Mediterranean area. We've been working on large projects such as the funding of urban projects. So plenty of projects that can change lives of people. We also had projects on mobility, on academic studies, and so on. So those three pillars, policies, partnerships, and projects, allow us to create an integrated approach. We've been working for 10 years, more or less, with the UFM. And we had, as I said, 50 labeled projects, 300 fora with experts, 25,000 stakeholders from the Mediterranean Sea that met within the UFM. The UFM has made a lot, but we can also wonder about its limitations, the challenges it has faced. Governance is based on unanimity. All the member states have the chance to take the floor. This makes decision-making harder, more difficult. This is one of the limitations that we face within the UFM. Then there are also conflicts, as Nathalie Loiseau said. There are political problems in the Mediterranean area. This limits dialogue, this limits our potential of action, but still, we still manage to take concrete action. States still find it difficult to commit in regional multilateralism. We don't always work together to tackle common issues that we face, so we need to go beyond those national policies. Let's focus on common policies. Not to mention COVID. COVID actually is a challenge as well. It limited our exchanges. So here are the challenges that we've faced. But let's mostly look at the future. What can we do to support those policies? I think everyone agrees on how important it is to tackle common issues together. For Europe, it is key to focus on the southern neighborhood. I think it is absolutely key. We have common challenges. We share a lot. Moreover, the southern Mediterranean area is like the door towards Africa. And as Fatala Sijinmassi said, the future of Europe is in the south. I think that we agree on that. This is why it is so key to invest in the southern neighborhood. Then we should develop a positive agenda for the Mediterranean area. Often we talk about the negative aspects of the Mediterranean Sea. There are tragedies happening in the Mediterranean Sea, mind you, but we also have a young population in the countries of the southern Mediterranean. So let's work on a positive agenda. Let's invest in economic integration. Let's invest in social and human development. Everything we'll do in that field will be fruitful. Let's invest in Erasmus, student mobility, student exchanges. Let's focus on youth employment with cross exchanges. Let's promote cultural dialogue in order to fight terrorism and radicalism. Let's promote sustainable development. Let's make a change in the mindsets, because we'll have a Green Deal only if countries around Europe implement the Green Deal as well. All those policies for sustainable development, all those blue policies must be shared more widely. Third pillar, if I may say, let's focus on civil society. Mr. Vasconcelos said it, civil society are key actors. They can bring change on the ground. Let's focus on women and young people. Let's help them implement concrete projects. For instance, there was a project called Les Deux Rives in Marseille. This is the kind of projects that we can implement together. And then let's use the current tools that exist. I'm thinking mostly about the General Secretariat of the UFM. It is important to use the tools that are existing. Let's take ownership of those tools. It is very important in order to upscale projects. There are projects existing. Let's take ownership of those projects. Let's try to find synergies, make them more consistent. Let's not forget the political dimension as well. It was one of the recommendations from the roadmap that had been adopted in 2016. We must be able to tackle key political issues within the UFM. The 43 member states are around the same table with the EU, and it is a key opportunity to tackle political sensitive issues. And then, given that we don't have much time left, let me quote Kofi Annan, who said in substance, there's no development without security, there's no security without development. And then, what we tend to forget is that there's no development and no security without human rights. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais maintenant donner la parole à Basma Kotmani.
Thank you very much indeed. I will now give the floor to the next speaker, Mrs. Kotmani, so that they can tell us about how civil society perceives this debate on the southern part of the Mediterranean, because there are these stakeholders over there. So what can Europe do best, or maybe differently? What are the expectations and what are maybe the disappointments as well?
Et merci pour cette opportunité.
Very much, and thank you for this opportunity.
J'interviens après deux éminents connaisseurs.
I take the floor following two people who have a very great knowledge of the Euro-Med policy,
des relations euro-méditerranéennes depuis 25
extensive
ans.
knowledge of everything which happened in political relations within the European Euro-Med region.
Et depuis une dizaine d'années, peut-être davantage, un acteur du côté du Sud. Et mon discours va peut-être diverger un
I have experience
petit
over the last 10 years as a southern stakeholder. Maybe my approach has a bit changed over the years.
Pour dire que nous avons besoin de poser les questions les plus difficiles, de les regarder en face,
the toughest question, to see reality face to face and to take a real political approach.
Il y a 10 ans, de l'autre côté de la
10 years ago, on the other side of the Mediterranean, in southern country, the young people raised and challenged the authority in place, demanded democracy,
Ce n'est pas idéologique, ce sont les mêmes valeurs que ceux du nord de la Méditerranée que nous revendiquons. Nous sommes mal gouvernés, nous ne sommes pas des citoyens chez nous, et je crois que ce message a fini par être érodé, très largement érodé, à la fois par le basculement dans la violence et par l'émergence d'un courant islamiste radical, effrayant, et qui a noyé ce message et noyé cette demande de démocratie. Je pense que l'approche technique aujourd'hui va continuer à empêcher que l'on regarde en face un certain nombre de questions qui sont plus graves, peut-être plus difficiles, mais elles sont loin d'être insolubles et surtout, je pense sincèrement que c'est en les définissant comme telles, c'est-à-dire en appelant un chat, et non pas un chat de gentille réforme administrative et bureaucratique. Et c'est en s'adressant au peuple avec le langage des peuples que l'on peut davantage parler aux dirigeants eux-mêmes. Ils ont un problème de légitimité, ils le savent. Lorsque les populations se sont soulevées en 2011, les appareils sécuritaires de ces régimes ont été traumatisés parce qu'ils ont été pris au dépourvu. Et depuis lors, ils ont une angoisse monumentale devant le simple citoyen, parce qu'ils ne savent pas ce qu'il peut en sortir. Et cette imprévisibilité du citoyen est devenue une obsession des pouvoirs. Je voudrais tout de même souligner un aspect qui, dans les tragédies de Syrie, de Libye, avant l'Irak, ont un aspect potentiellement positif. C'est que
at least one positive aspect, and that is that
dans d'autres pays qui n'ont pas basculé dans la violence,
in other countries which did not take the road of violence,
discrédit progressif mais assez rapide du
although
courant islamiste, car dans les pays où il y a eu violence, ce courant n'a pas su se démarquer des extrémistes. Et la conséquence est d'une certaine façon positive. Les populations sont désillusionnées par le courant islamiste, par son échec au pouvoir dans un pays comme l'Égypte, par son basculement dans la violence, parfois le radicalisme, même pour les modérés, sans pouvoir s'en démarquer, pour les pays où il y a eu conflit. Alors ceci donne au régime politique, surtout on le voit dans les pays du Golfe, la possibilité de sévir contre un courant dit salafiste, wahhabiste, etc., avec le soutien des populations, sans crainte, comme c'était le cas auparavant, de l'institution religieuse, parce que celle-ci elle-même est en crise profonde devant justement l'expression la plus radicale de ce qu'elle préconisait sur le plan de la pensée. Cependant, les régimes ont trouvé une merveilleuse excuse pour empêcher l'existence de groupes démocratiques. Aujourd'hui, au nom de leur participation et leur contribution à la sécurité internationale et à la lutte contre le radicalisme, ils arrêtent, ils harcèlent, ils tuent quand ils le jugent nécessaire. Ils s'attaquent des militants démocrates, des militants des droits de l'homme, qui n'ont rien d'islamiste, qui s'attaquent au tissu fragile des organisations de la société civile et à ces militants. Alors, c'est là, je crois, où il faut faire très attention quand on dit il faut soutenir les sociétés civiles, il faut s'adresser aux sociétés civiles. Oui, mais je vais y venir. Il y a peut-être des mesures plus importantes et plus courageuses qui sont nécessaires pour pouvoir parvenir aux sociétés civiles. Politiquement, c'est les sociétés qui s'étaient soulevées en 2011 et depuis lors sont aujourd'hui politiquement
raised in
enfermés dans une
2011
logique
are
mortelle.
enclosed in a
Il y avait un
deadly
mouvement populaire
logic.
non
There was
idéologique
a
qui
non-ideology-led
se réclamait des valeurs européennes,
population
mais
movement
imperceptiblement,
supporting
lorsque on
European
a vu
values,
émerger avec
but
un courant islamiste et certains pays qui
ideologically
se basculent
speaking,
dans le
with the
conflit,
emergence of
on a
Islamist
accueilli
movements in
favorablement le
several
retour
countries, the return of
dans
some
certains pays. Et
extremist
imperceptiblement,
parties
l'Europe
were
s'est mise à
welcomed
partager cette
in
crainte
several
des
countries.
peuples, dont les dirigeants. Donc, on a des dirigeants qui sont tout à fait ravis d'avoir une Europe si compréhensive de leur politique vis-à-vis de leurs militants démocrates. L'écho qui a été donné récemment au mouvement de protestation, au moment des affreux attentats qui ont eu lieu en France notamment, et de la décapitation d'un professeur,
when a professor in France was
vous avez
beheaded,
vu combien ces mouvements de protestation, l'ampleur qu'ont pris ces mouvements de contestation à travers tout le monde
the
musulman.
extent of
La réalité,
such
c'est aussi
protests in the Muslim
que
world.
ceci est fait
But in reality,
ceci sert un
this
certain nombre de dirigeants de la
serves
région
also the
qui sont bien
purpose
contents
of
de cacher les
some
vrais problèmes
leaders
qui
of
se
the
posent
region,
aux citoyens
very
de
happy
ces
to
pays.
hide
Monsieur Erdogan
the
était
real
très
issues
content de se
people
poser en
face
champion de la défense de
these
l'islam
countries. For
face à
example,
une
Mr.
laïcité
Erdogan
agressive,
was very
offensive,
happy to defend
anti-religieuse, etc. Et le
Islam
président Sisi était
against
encore plus content
laïcité and such
d'apparaître dans le
things.
rôle
And
de
President
champion de
Sisi
la
was even
tolérance et d'être remercié par
happier
le
to be
président
the champion
Macron
of
pour
tolerance and
son
to be
aide
applauded
dans
by
la
President
défense de la
Macron
laïcité.
for
Alors,
his support in
les
the
citoyens de cette région,
defense of
oui, veulent que
laïcité.
leur culture et leur religion soient
So
respectées,
people in
certes, mais ils
those
veulent d'abord être
regions,
des citoyens.
in those countries, want
On
of
a
course
vu
their religion
qu'il a
and
été
their culture to be
impossible
respected, but first of all, they want to be citizens. And
d'endiguer
we saw that it was
les
impossible
conséquences
to
des
put
conflits
a
de cette
stop
région.
to the
Les
consequences
réfugiés,
of
les
conflicts in
immigrés
this
sont
region.
arrivés par
The
centaines
refugees
de milliers.
arrived by
Ils
the
continueront
hundreds
à
of thousands,
arriver
and they
en
will
Europe
keep
tant
coming.
que ces
They will
facteurs
keep
qui les
arriving
poussent
to
au
the shores
départ
of Europe
restent
as long
inchangés
as
ou
the
bien se
reasons for
détériorent.
which they leave their countries
Par
continue,
exemple,
remain
l'aide à
unchanged,
l'éducation, les
or
échanges
deteriorate. For example,
universitaires,
support to education,
l'aide technique,
university
économique sont
exchanges,
indispensables. Mais
economic support.
sans un
Of course, it
environnement
is
politique
a
sûr,
requirement, but
on ne
without
répondra
a
pas
safe
au
political
problème de la
environment,
fuite.
we will not
Dès qu'ils ont
solve
quelques compétences
the
acquises,
issue,
les
the reasons why
habitants de
people
ces
leave
régions,
their
les populations
countries,
cherchent à
because
partir.
those people
Et la
want
fuite
to
des
leave their
cerveaux est
country,
sans
and
précédent
the
au
brain
cours de ces
drain
10
is
dernières années, pays
unprecedented
en conflit ou pas.
along the last 10
Je vais
years
prendre deux
for
exemples et deux
conflict
chiffres
countries
seulement.
or
La
non-conflict
Syrie,
countries.
on
Let me
sait
take
qu'il
two
y a des
examples. Syria,
centaines de
we
milliers,
know
des millions,
that
des millions
million, not
de
hundreds of
réfugiés
thousands,
et
but millions of
près d'1 million
refugees,
qui est arrivé en Europe.
and almost 1 million of
Mais il
them
est parti
arrived
aussi
in
de
Europe.
Syrie
But from
plus de 15
Syria,
000
more
médecins
than
au cours des
15,000
10
doctors,
dernières années
medical
seulement.
doctors left
Donc, quand on dit 15
in the
000
last
médecins sont partis,
15
quand on
years only. So when a country loses so many
plus que
doctors,
30, que veut dire cela pour une population
what
qui ne
does
peut
it
pas
mean
être soignée?
for a population
Lorsque le
which does
Liban,
not have access to
qui
care? For
récemment a
example, when
connu une
Lebanon,
horrible
which
explosion, on ne va pas appeler ça un attentat,
suffered
une horrible
an awful explosion
ce pays
recently.
qui n'est pas en guerre pourtant.
This
Il
is
y a
not a country at
380
war,
000 Libanais
but there are
qui, au lendemain de cette
380,000
explosion,
Lebanese people
cherchaient à partir.
in the
Au tout
aftermath
début
of this
septembre
explosion
2020.
wanted to
Tout
leave
cela
their
nous
country
dit que
at the
ces
beginning of September
environnements deviennent
2020, which means
littéralement
that
invivables.
those environments
Alors,
are
il faut peut-être
unlivable,
prendre la
literally
mesure
speaking.
de
So maybe we should take the
considérable
time to
détérioration,
understand
crise
this
qui secoue
dire
l'ensemble de ces sociétés.
deterioration of such
Les pays de la
societies.
région ont
The
un problème
countries of
de
the region
légitimité.
are
Ne
have
plus
a
leur
legitimity.
qu'ils sont des
Legitimacy issue.
partenaires égaux,
They're here, they
irréprochables,
keep hearing that they are
fréquentables,
partners treated as
et tout de
equal,
même un pas en
that they are
avant, je
beyond
crois,
reproach.
dans
I believe that
la
this
manière de
is
poser les problèmes.
a wrong way
à court terme, je vais citer
tackle the problems.
trois
On the longer term,
domaines, si vous voulez, dans
let me
lesquels
give
il me
you
paraît
3
indispensable
areas
de
as an
véritablement avoir un
in which
discours
I believe
courageux.
we
Celui-ci
must
ne
have
menacera
brave
pas, je vous assure,
approach,
ne menacera pas
which
ni le
will
commerce,
not
ni les
threat
relations avec l'Europe.
trade
Ces
or
pays-là sont
relations
aux abois.
with Europe.
Les régimes ont
These
besoin de la
countries
reconnaissance européenne.
need
La simple
European recognition.
reconnaissance en
The
elle-même
mere
est un
recognition
cadeau
in
qui leur est
itself
fait.
is a gift
Il
given
faut
to them.
parvenir à défendre les
We
démocrates
must
devant
defend
leurs
the
dirigeants
Democrats
autoritaires.
against the
Parce que ces
authoritarian
démocrates
leaders,
perdent
because
leur
those Democrats
pertinence. Ils
lose
perdent
their
l'espace.
relevance,
Ils ont
their
perdu les espaces dans lesquels
lose
ils
and they
peuvent
have lost
évoluer.
their margin
Et
of
ces
maneuver.
espaces se sont fermés sur eux. Donc, il est indispensable
It is
aujourd'hui
therefore
que
key
un gouvernement européen, a fortiori des
that
parlementaires
a
européens,
European government, and
mais
why
des
not
gouvernements, négocient avec les
parliamentarians
gouvernements
from
des pays
Europe
du Sud un
negotiate
accès
with
et une
southern country
protection à la
governments
société civile.
access and
Il
protection
n'est
for
pas
civil
acceptable
society.
que
We
les
cannot
organisations de la
accept
société civile ne
that
puissent
civil
pas
society
opérer.
organizations
Nous avons besoin de
cannot
l'appui
operate.
des
We
Européens
need
aux
the
associations
support
professionnelles,
of the
aux
Europeans
organisations de la
to
société
professional
civile. Il
organizations,
y a
to
un
civil
domaine
society
en particulier
organizations,
que les régimes
notably
autoritaires
in
veulent
one
absolument
area,
soumettre et ont soumis et ont dévoyé. C'est celui du secteur du droit, de la justice.
is
Les
the area of justice, of the area of law, which suffered a lot under
de justice. Et il y a
totalitarian
eu parmi
regime.
les
The
avocats
very
et les
notion of
juges un vrai
justice,
mouvement
and amongst
démocratique au
lawyers
moment
and
qui a précédé
judges,
2011
there was a
d'ailleurs,
real
et qui
democratic
ensuite
movement
qui s'est
after
exprimé en
2011,
2011. Celui-ci est
expressed
aujourd'hui
then.
totalement muselé. C'est le cas à travers toute la
And today,
région. Nous
their
avons
voice
besoin de ces
were
acteurs
shut.
de l'état de
But
droit.
today, we
Il
need
faut
those
absolument qu'ils soient là
rule of
avant
law
même
stakeholders.
de
We
donner la
need
liberté de
them
parole aux populations.
before
Nous avons
even
besoin du
giving
droit dans ces pays. L'arbitraire nous
the
achève.
ability to the
L'arbitraire
population
nous
to
tue.
speak.
L'arbitraire nous empêche de
We
respirer,
need them.
nous empêche de
The
planifier l'avenir
arbitrary
et par conséquent
arbitrary
pousse
regimes
n'importe
makes
quel
it
jeune
impossible for
de
us to
n'importe
do
lequel de
anything
ces
to
pays
act
à vouloir
for
partir.
any
Parce
young
que
and push
l'imprévisible de l'arbitraire est tel
the young people in our
que
countries
il n'est pas
to leave
possible de
their
prévoir son
countries.
avenir, de
The
planifier
arbitrarian
et de dire voilà ce
rules
que c'est que de demander
prevent
la
the
dignité.
young
C'est
people to
pouvoir
foresee their
planifier ne
future and
serait-ce
to
que sa
plan
vie
their
et celle
future. And this
de
is
ses
what
enfants.
young people
Donc,
want and
négocier
everyone
avec les
wants.
gouvernements
They want to
l'accès à la
plan their
société
future, the
civile, aux
life of
protections
their
de cette société civile. Je
family.
crois que les
So, yes,
pouvoirs
we must
ne sont
plan
pas
the
en
protection for civil
position
society. I
de
don't believe
dire
that
non,
the
ces
authorities in
acteurs-là ne
those
sont pas
countries
pertinents. Ils sont
are
nécessaires
able
dans ces sociétés
to
et vous le savez mieux
say
que
no
moi.
to
À long
such
terme, je
demands.
dirais, nous
On the
avons
longer
constaté au
term,
cours de
I
ces
would
10
say
dernières
that,
années
oh,
que les
rather, I
démocrates
would
ne
say
sont
that
pas
in
bien
the last 10 years,
organisés,
we've
qu'ils n'ont
seen
pas
that the
été en
Democrats
mesure
are
de
not well
s'organiser. Nous
organized,
avons des
that they
organisations
were
des
not
droits de
able to
l'homme,
organize.
du
We
travail de
have
plaidoyer,
human
etc.
rights
Mais il n'y a pas de
organizations,
parti
we have advocacy
politique,
work,
de
but we
structures
don't have a political
organisationnelles qui
party,
ont
we don't
réussi à
have
agréger les
legal
voix des
structures
démocrates.
which could
S'il y a
aggregate
un
the
terrain où vous
voices
pouvez les
of
aider,
Democrats.
parce que
If
vous
you
êtes
can
tous
help
des
them in
membres
one
de
specific area
parlement, donc
because
de
you are
partis
all
politiques
parliamentarians, so you are
qui
all members
eux-mêmes s'agrègent
of
pour
political parties
être
which
représentés au sein
themselves
d'un parlement
aggregate
européen,
to
eh
be
bien
represented within the
ce sont
European
ces
Parliament.
modes d'agrégation des voix démocratiques,
You can support them
l'action collective qu'ils peuvent
in the
mener,
way they
parce
can
qu'ils
aggregate
ne sont qu'une
themselves
série
and
d'individus. Ils ne
exercise
parviennent pas à
political
s'organiser
actions
et ne
because
parviennent
they are
pas
only a
à
bunch
émerger
of
face
individuals
à,
which are
d'une
not
part,
able to
des
organize
partis au
together
pouvoir et
and
d'autre part, un courant
to
islamiste qui, pendant des
face
décennies, a pu s'organiser,
parties
mais pas le
in
courant
power.
démocrate. Nous continuons de souffrir de cela
We
et il faut
are
10 ans
still
pour faire un
suffering
parti
today from
politique.
this
Eh bien,
situation.
prenons
It
les
takes
10
10 years
prochaines années,
to build
mais
a political
allons
party. So
véritablement
let's
vers
endeavor
une action
in the next
volontaire
10 years to do
d'organiser ces
just
voies
this.
et de continuer d'abord par les
Let's make sure
protéger, bien
that
sûr,
we can
devant
continue
des régimes et
to
des gouvernements qui
to
veulent
protect
les
also
museler.
civil society
Je m'arrêterai
from
là.
authoritarian regimes
Peut-être
and
une note un
governments. I will stop
peu,
here, maybe on a more
je dirais, parce qu'on
cheerful
n'éloignera pas les
note.
rives nord et sud l'une
Let's
de
have
l'autre,
hope, and I'm
et
sure
que
that
le sud
both sides
cherchera
of
à
the
venir dans le
Mediterranean
nord si on
will
continue,
keep in close contact
sans regarder
and
ces
will
questions
keep
plus
close
difficiles et plus
cooperation
graves
to deal with
qui
those
tourmentent les
more
sociétés du Sud.
difficult issues.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much indeed.
Merci beaucoup à nos trois intervenants.
I would like to thank our three speakers for the very interesting presentations. It was very lucid, very honest as well. So thank you. Now that you've taken the floor, I have the task to ask you the first question. Actually, I have dozens of questions. But while listening to you, highlighting the fact that as members of parliament we have to play our role, I would have a twofold question to the three of you. Is what is being voted by the European Parliament heard? You know, there are a lot of resolutions on the human rights in the countries of the Southern Mediterranean. We had, for instance, a resolution on human rights in Algeria that led to a reaction of the Algerian authorities. And I'm wondering, are those resolutions impacting civil societies? Is our voice heard? Do we have the necessary media to engage the civil society? Because as you know, the current world is full of disinformation and propaganda. Before we said that the EU had a soft power. It is honorable, but sometimes it is limiting as well, because we behave well in a way in a world that is more often than ever misbehaving. So is our voice heard? Are our messages conveyed? What could we do better? How could we do more to work with the civil society in the southern neighborhood of the EU? And then, what about conditionality of our support on the rule of law? Because as it was said, when there's no justice, there's no hope. We are currently working on the conditionality on the rule of law within the EU. Fortunately, it is now necessary. Would it make sense for our partners from the southern part of the Mediterranean Sea? Who'd like to take the floor? Well, I will take the floor in French now. I think that the action of the European Parliament is heard by ambassadors based in Brussels. It has an impact on the different regimes when resolutions have an impact on the different states, on investments, on support. We've seen that. There are trade agreements. When resolutions have an impact on those trade agreements, then the European Parliament will be heard. So then there's a need for conditionality. You need conditionality with the European policies. It must not only be about human rights. If you add a conditionality on the European economic policies, you will have an impact for sure. So conditionality with the rule of law is not enough. You need conditionality and an impact on the trade agreements. Moreover, it is necessary to commit civil society stakeholders, civil society organizations when you work on resolutions. Moreover, I would suggest you to do more fact-finding missions. For instance, there are 60,000 political prisoners in Egypt. This is huge. This is something unique in the world. 60,000 political prisoners. This is a lot. I remember when I was in exile, when I was a political prisoner in Portugal, I was always exchanging with French members of parliament, with lawyers, with League of Lawyers, in order to give political support and legal support to political prisoners. Such actions would be most welcome. It is necessary to analyze what type of political prisoners are in Egypt and how we can help them, for instance, through different parliamentary actions. Delphine, would you like to take the floor in order to answer that question? Thank you very much. I said it was a twofold question. First, you raised the media.
Et je crois que c'est un vrai sujet.
Take the floor. Who do you reach out to? Listening to us.
Aussi culturelles, des politiques de communication.
Je
crois en effet qu'on ne développe pas suffisamment d'outils pour toucher les gens là où ils sont, dans la langue aussi qu'ils comprennent. Parce que souvent on a tendance à s'exprimer en français, en anglais, mais pas toujours en arabe et pas toujours pour arriver à les atteindre, ou utiliser ces nouveaux moyens de communication que sont les réseaux sociaux qui écoutent beaucoup les jeunes, traiter justement des désinformations.
With information, fake news, which are of the utmost importance, as we can see currently here, but on a daily basis. And I believe that it is a real issue at stake, because many things are said and are just forced to not match reality. So this is something we should take into account. And then the other issue is, how should I put it? Yeah, we need new tools, just precisely for this purpose. Then the issue of conditionality is a highly political question, of course. I will go back to what Ms. Conmany said on the fact that we must support civil society activists in their actions and to protect them, to support them. I believe it is very important indeed, and the legal issue that you mentioned is also very important, and giving people the legal tools to protect themselves is also something very important, as you mentioned, and having a multilateral approach, and we can of course have discussions on this when we talk about the rights of women, when we talk about human rights, the fact of having those multilateral legal tools which enable the creation of a framework of protection of human rights activists acting in their own countries and supporting the Democrats, also the moderates, who, how should I put it, will have the means to defend their rights. I believe that it is very important.
Thank you, Mr. Mani. Would you like to react? Yes, absolutely, because this is a very relevant question. We need to distinguish two types of countries, those that are in conflict and those that are in transition. And we hope that transition will go on. In Maghreb, we mostly have countries in transition. And I hope they won't get into conflict. But for countries in conflict, let me give you an example. Maybe I will also question the international approach, that is, that in conflict situations, we need to implement a ceasefire and then start elections. Very quickly, we need elections in order to have popular legitimacy. The truth is that those elections fail. They create disorder. When we don't have a security or safe situation, it does not work. We need a legal framework that allows to operate. Let me give you an example. For 5 years, we've been fighting in order to get funding from a judge and lawyer training in Syria, saying that we need to train them now so that we'll have a group of judges and lawyers that are well trained when transition will happen. Because Syrian justice at the moment is filled with corruption. And for 5 years, we've been said that we need to wait for a transition, but it will be too late. We need to train people now. The power has demolished that field. In Syria, as you know, there is a fight between, or rather, throughout the world, there's a fight between case law, so English-speaking law, and American law. So we need new tools. We don't care about that in Syria. Common law, case law, and so on. It doesn't matter. But we need law, and we need to train judges and lawyers. Álvaro Vasconcelos said that we need lawyers to defend activists, political prisoners, and so on. And I agree with him. Then, to pick up on what was said on the media, when a lawyer, a white lawyer, a European lawyer is arrested, prosecuted, and so on, he receives high protection. This is a very good protection. We need such things, and we need to use media to protect lawyers. When there's a lot of fuss in the media, the political powers hesitate to take action. For instance, there was an Egyptian activist that was, that met Barack Obama, and since then they don't do anything against him. Maybe in Europe we should learn from the Russian methods. Those methods are very efficient, actually. The Russian media are very active. Sputnik, Russia Today, they are available in many languages, including Arabic, and they are very efficient. So I think this is an interesting tool that we should use as well. We should use social media in different languages. Social media is a space where we should be active, aggressively active. As you said, Ms. Loiseau, we behave way too well. We act with courtesy, and our methods are too soft. This is soft power, but sometimes some hard methods is positive as well.
I would like to make a question now. It will be brief, but I would like to make this analysis based on what you have been commenting so far. The creation, Mr. Vasconcelos was mentioning a lot of jobs, a lot of posts, and you were talking for young people as well. And here in Europe, as Natalie knows as well, one of the topics where we have a great impact and that we are setting as a priority is digitalization in all the different senses and environments. I would like to know your opinion, whether you believe that the new technologies or the digitalization processes can directly help to increase or to foster the creation of jobs in the region, mainly for the youth. And whether you believe that that perspective can help to increase the European values, the democratic European values in the region. I believe this is an interesting question from that point of view, that is to say, the link between the goals that the European Union and the Parliament are applying in terms of how this can evolve, the opportunities of how this can evolve in the region. What's your opinion in this regard?
I take countries from the south, especially countries from the Maghreb, on which we can have major political impact because the EU is a key actor for the Maghreb countries because of the trade exchanges that we have, because of migrations, and because of the common culture that we have. In Maghreb countries, the major social challenges are still linked to agriculture. If we take Tunisia, this is the case. So digitalization can be a solution, obviously. Young people, they use social media very actively, but we should be way more generous when it comes to agriculture. We should be ready to open our markets to Maghreb countries and Maghreb products. We should support the creation of cooperatives between agricultural SMEs. There's a lot of misery in those countries. COVID will make things even worse. Not only in those countries, obviously, but throughout the world. With the European recession, situation will be dramatic in Europe, but also in southern countries. So we should focus on industrial modernization. This is a key aspect. The digital transition is important as well, but let's mostly focus on the agricultural transition of those countries. This will be key for those countries, and this could lead to riots, to revolutions. So I would say that we need to focus on agriculture and its modernization. So this is green agriculture, modern agriculture, and we should apply all this in the agricultural field in southern countries. Thank you. Ms. Bourrian? Yes, thank you very much. I agree with Mr. Vasconcelos. Agriculture is very important. I've been working on that issue for a while. Sustainable development and sustainable agriculture is a key dimension for those countries. However, I think that digitalization is key for modernization, and it is very important that all the countries seize modernization. They need to be more modern. It will create jobs. It will create digital jobs, for instance. And it is important that those countries focus on digitization, because if they don't, they won't be competitive. Moreover, digitization will improve the use of different industries. For instance, with the digital technologies, we can anticipate weather conditions, we can improve crops or crop management, we can improve exportation, and so on. So there are a lot of opportunities that come with digitization. Those countries must not miss those opportunities, or it would be a major disadvantage in the future. In the meantime, let's make sure that women are involved in digital training and digital literacy. In different projects carried out by the UFM, we've noticed that women are not always fully associated to those trainings, or once trained, they leave the digital field. And it is very important that they can be associated with the digital field. Then, as it was said, there are a lot of young people in those countries from the southern part of the Mediterranean Sea, and they are ready to embrace the culture of the digital culture. If well used, digital culture can be very fruitful. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Kodmani.
Thank you. Mrs. Kodmani. I don't have anything to say on the agricultural issue, if only that farmers contributed to the uprising of the population in those countries. And as Mrs. Marion and Mr. Vasconcelos said, yes, digitalization, I believe that it is one of the ways, it's not a new way, but it deserves to be used fully in view of the training and the connection at all levels, at the cultural level, for example, but also for technical trainings and political dialogue, and this to enable a virtual connection with all societies of the region. We experience it as Syrians. We are a major diaspora, and we have permanent connection with our country, and we have this virtual connection, and training programs of the greatest quality have been implemented through digital tools, and young people love this kind of trainings. Please, in Arab, in the Arab language, because if it must be in German or English or French, it just will be not fit for purpose. So we need training content in Arabic. You can't even imagine to what extent people are willing to go through such trainings, and they are willing to gather new knowledge and to get connected with modern societies. We are experimenting such tools on a daily basis because of the pandemic, so we must use them fully with a lot of imagination. This is a very promising ground for the future. That's it for me. Thank you. José Ramón, you wanted to say something.
No sé si tú querías hacer alguna otra pregunta.
No, Natalie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but looking at the watch, I wanted to thank the speakers, but I don't know if you want to make a brief question before we close off.
Si nos intervenants ont encore 5 minutes, et si
well, maybe if our speakers still have another 5 minutes, and if you have another 5 minutes, Roger Ramon, I have an extra question, but it would deserve long answers, but you will have to answer briefly. What could be the role of diasporas in Europe from the Maghreb countries, from Lebanon, from Syria? What could be their role to improve, to develop the Euromed partnership in the right direction? It's a very important question you ask. I believe it is a key question. And I go back to the issue of Maghreb I broached earlier. Maghreb associations are very active indeed in Europe. Europe is a democratic example for Maghreb countries. For example, in Belgium, the number of local elect people from Moroccan origins and in connection with Moroccan associations, it's huge. And I participate to seminars in Morocco, just to give this example. There are always in Europe, everywhere in Europe, representatives of Moroccan associations participating to such seminars with a good knowledge of Europe, of European institutions, and they follow very well the European Parliament, much more than people in the Maghreb countries. And such associations, I believe, are key partner because of their intellectual capacities and a whole bunch of different stakeholders. Human exchanges in the Mediterranean are many. Thousands and thousands of people are endlessly going back and forwards between both sides of the Mediterranean. Millions of people indeed. So the key work is to empower those groups, show them that they are key actors, give them visibility. And this is what was lacking at the start of the UFM, not enough visibility given to such associations in the process. Give them visibility, empower them, make them know that they are key actors. And this is a key issue for Europe. Such associations defend a principle I defend myself, and which is hospitality, which is an ethical imperative. So we cannot have this debate of the integration of migrants in Europe without this, because this is based on what it does on migration that Europe will be perceived in the rest of the world. The less Europe can demonstrate its hospitality, the less soft power it will have. Soft power is an added value to power. The first military power in the world, the US, have great soft power in the world. Its attractiveness and its values, which were lost, of course, with Trump, but which will be back on the forefront. You will see how the United States will, from now on, use again their soft power in their global relationships. So yes, hospitality towards the migrants is a key issue. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madame Borian. Yes, thank you very much indeed. In a nutshell, everyone will agree on the key role diasporas can play as a bridge between cultures to help different populations and different cultures better understand one another. Also to facilitate experience sharing, because we have a lot to learn from one another. And such groups, diasporas, can play this part and be a bridge for culture, but also in terms of economic development, they play a key part as well to create this connection to support the internationalization of their countries of origin. So I believe that investing on such groups is indeed essential. Thank you, Ms. Konmani. So I will take a concrete example because we talked about diasporas from the Maghreb. I will take the example of the one from Syria and maybe from Lebanon. For a country like Syria, which went through a conflict, the diaspora is more numerous than the population which remained within the country. And most probably, the skills must be based on a 1 to 10 ratio. So 10% of skills remained within the country and 90% outside of the country, in neighboring countries, but also in European countries and American countries from the American continent. And this diaspora has modern knowledge, has important resources. As it is financially independent because it is integrated in the societies where it lives, it is independent from the governments and the neighboring countries. That is, all the diaspora is not influenced by other countries, it's independent. And finally, I would say that all members of this diaspora will not go back to Syria. Far from it, some of them have been living abroad for more than 40 years, but trying to make them come back in another way, maybe through a financial contribution or a contribution through knowledge, skills, as we saw in other countries, for example, in South Africa, where the diaspora played a key part while the diaspora members did not necessarily go back to the country. So yes, with the diaspora, we have a card to play, a trump card up our sleeves. I was saying earlier that we must teach in Arabic, but this is the role of the diaspora to organize, to teach, because they are well organized. Because donors will get tired after just a few months or maybe a few years of helping a country like ours, but the diaspora will keep interested on the long term. So countries like ours can be saved by their diaspora, and the diaspora members are also the spokespeople of their countries abroad, which is why I believe it is a key, a strategic stakeholder, which we must support and encourage to act collectively, because a businessman has a strong voice, but three businessmen together become a potential partner for Europe to co-finance projects or initiatives, which is why I believe it is also important to encourage them, to give them legitimacy by aggregating them and by encouraging them to regroup to have a deeper strategic impact. Thank you. Right.
Thank you very much to the three of you. We have talked about the 25 years of Barcelona, but we could probably speak for the next 25 years about how knowledge, how experience in our personal, in the personal experiences of our three panelists have really given us a good perspective of the situation in the Mediterranean. It's been a privilege to have you with us today. We have been talking about one of the most important debates of the Euro-Mediterranean relations. We have shared ideas that could be very important, some of them because they are already being implemented, but others that could open new doors and that could generate the impulse to continue for another 25 years, strengthening the collaboration on a Mediterranean level. And I think our responsibility has to go beyond this meeting to strengthen these relations that are essential for both sides of the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, as we all well know, sometimes we see a fatigue and even a pessimism from the European institutions when we talk about the policies for the neighborhood policies. With Natalie, we often talk about the southern neighborhood, but how can we continue talking about these policies for the southern neighborhood, how to strengthen them? And unfortunately, too often, this debate has a negative turn on it, or focuses only on the negative aspects. And as frustrating as this may seem, and even though some of the colleagues might want to leave this behind, I think this Euro-Mediterranean policy works, and I think we have to keep fighting. We cannot give up. Absolutely not. And I think if there's something that we have learned with the coronavirus pandemic, is that we can't hide from the problems. We just have to face them head on. And the only way of facing them is through collaboration. Sharing my personal experience for a minute, I said before, I live in the center of the Mediterranean, the Balearic Islands. I have been represented in that of my islands. I've also been a senator and the president of the Spanish delegation of the Congress and the Senate in the Union for the Mediterranean. And so I know firsthand what this reality is. And I do know that we have the capability, the potential, and the knowledge so that all of the parts that form this Mediterranean region on both sides can become a commitment, not on an institutional level, but a personal level too, for each and every one of us. And transmit this message beyond our borders. And I think it's very important to send this message beyond the institutions and get it to the civil society, where each and every one of us can take on this message. I just wanted to go back to some of the messages that we have taken on. One of the elements that are very relevant for the region, we don't have to talk about this now, of course, we don't have time, but maybe in the future we should speak about the following. Does democracy come from stability, or does stability come from democracy? So we've been talking about the reality, the everyday situation of this relationship, but how do we see this in the future? What role do these play, and what role do new technologies play in this relation? I think there are many elements that are very interesting in this debate. For example, how agriculture and the development of agriculture in some regions, especially in Morocco and in the north of the Southern Mediterranean, have to be developed with different mechanisms and rhythms and perspectives. Basically, what I want to say is that it has been a real pleasure to have you here, to have been able to listen to you firsthand, to have had this joint reflection, and not only on an institutional level and on a rational level, but also sharing our experience and our hearts. And all I can say are two more things before I give the floor to my dear colleague Natalie. Two things I will say. I hope we can hold a new event, seminar, but physically, hopefully not behind our screens and through these Zooms, platforms, or whatever the application we choose. But I hope we can soon meet. I hope we leave this pandemic behind. And now, as Christmas approaches, I would like to, in Spain, we say something when you don't win the lottery. You say, okay, you don't win lottery, but you gain in health. And I always think that I hope you gain in health. I mean, if you win the lottery, of course, more than that's even better. But the most important thing is to stay healthy so you can enjoy next year in physically in person, so we can give each other a pat on the back. Molto obrigado, merci beaucoup, shukran, and Natalie, you have the floor for the closure of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, José Ramon. Thank you to our three speakers for the frank exchanges. Tomorrow, the European Council is meeting and should publish conclusions on the Euro-Mediterranean dialogue, and it should prepare a communication for spring 2021 in order to renew, if I may say, its relationship with the southern neighborhood. I hope that we will update this partnership. You can count on our commitment and our interest in that issue. I am convinced that when there's a crisis on one side of the Mediterranean Sea, it becomes a crisis for the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. And when something positive happens on one bank of our common sea, it spreads to the other bank. We have common history, we have common destiny. Let's try to make this destiny a positive one, and let's honor those who created the process of Barcelona 25 years ago. And given that this is soon the end of the year, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you. Have a nice evening. And the interpreters, thank you for listening to them.
Merci.
All the best.
All the best. It was very interesting. Merci beaucoup.